How's it going, everybody? All you bird fans out there, welcome back to another video. We're in the middle of waterfowl migration right now. Not so much geese, we just kind of missed those, but specifically ducks, especially in my area right now, coming through full force. So I figured it might be nice to kind of give my bird ID tips and tricks for how to identify those pesky little water birds that you see out in the middle of the lake. As always, feel free to share this with anybody who you think might benefit off of it. I know I have a lot of friends who've been texting me lately asking why they can't figure out why that mallard looks so weird. And I have to say, because it's probably not one, because right now we're kind of going through that whole phase of a lot of ducks. So feel free to like this, share this with anybody who you think would be interested in, and let's get started. So first off, just differentiating between geese versus ducks. I'm not going to spend too much time on this because I think y'all probably have a fairly good grasp on it. Both in the same group of water birds, Anseriformes, your geese, your ducks, your swans, all that. Just a little bit basic taxonomy. Ducks, you're going to have smaller, more compact bodies than geese. You're generally going to have larger. They're going to have longer necks. That's usually what we end up seeing. Obviously, this isn't totally true, but for the most part, general taxonomy, this is what you're going to see. We also have one more water bird that you might see on the water that does make an appearance, especially right now. We're getting them coming in right now. And those are our cormorants. In Illinois and Ohio, we get one species of cormorant regularly, double-crested cormorant. Easiest way to tell them apart because they're not really related to geese to ducks at all. Easiest way to parse them out is just that kind of smaller snake-looking head and that hooked bill is really diagnostic. Only your mergansers or ducksy are going to see with hooked bills, and you can tell them apart pretty easily. So for the most part, don't really worry about cormorants. I'm not going to spend much time on them, but I figured I should probably mention them just because you can't see them on the water. For geese in our area, what we're going to be expecting are our Canada geese. I'm sure everyone's had a run-in with one of those, so not going to spend too much time on that. I've worked at a zoo for 5 years. I know exactly what these buddies can do. Our cackling geese, which look exactly almost like a Canada goose, and I'll go over later on how to parse those out. Our greater white-fronted geese, which you'll see migrating through. You can see them in decently big flocks. They're not the most common, but you definitely see them. And then our snow geese, which do show two color phases. On the left, you have your white snow goose, and on your right, you have your blue snow goose. So if you see a mixed flock of birds that look like geese that have kind of this mixturing of colors, probably going to be what you're looking at. And on the duck side of things, you've got your mallards. Everybody loves a good mallard. Pretty common duck. Not going to say much about it. You've got your green-winged teals as well as your blue-winged teals. Northern shovelers, your American black duck, gadwall, bufflehead, and your wood duck. So a lot of different, species that we're going to be seeing, especially of ducks happening right now. So I'm going to hit most upon those. Obviously, I only showed you the drakes, which is a male and breeding plumage, just because, for the most part, it's going to be what you're easily able to tell apart. So figured might as well just give the most typical looking, just to describe them. Now, waterbird IDs can be really hard. As far as mechanical issues go, there's a couple that are pretty glaring. That's a pun. For the starters, water has this great property known as reflectivity, and y'all have probably seen this when, you're out at the beach and you're looking at this really pretty sunset and you're looking at all the colors reflecting right off the water and you say, wow, that's a beautiful sunset. And that's a great, it's really cool. It's really awesome. When you're birding for ducks that are usually on the water, it's not as awesome. A lot of times it can cause a lot of silhouetting issues. You're not going to be able to see those colors that most people are looking for when they're identifying a bird. Because, here's a hint, most people when they try to identify birds, they're looking solely at color. And when you silhouette the bird, you kind of take that away. You get a nice shadowing kind of thing, and if that's the only thing you're going for, it's essentially worthless. The other thing that we really kind of have issues with ducks is, like I said, they're on water most of the time, and a lot of times when a duck is on the water, it's not hanging out right by the shore, right where you are. Usually you're going to see these big flocks hanging out right in the middle of the lake. And sometimes your optics just might not be good enough. I know. Usually what I do is I use my 10 by 32 binoculars. I love my binoculars. I think they're awesome. Sometimes they just don't cut it, especially if I find myself at a really big lake. Like I found one time looking for redneck grebe. Couldn't tell if there was a redneck grebe there because, quite frankly, I couldn't see the birds in the middle of the lake. So sometimes your optics just aren't going to be good enough. You're either going to not really be able to see the bird at all, or you're going to not be able to tell different diagnostic features, you know, those kind of color patterns and all that you're looking for when you usually want to use to identify a bird. Easiest ways that we can mitigate those, and I'm not going to touch upon these for super long just because it's not the main bulk of it, but the easiest ways to mitigate these things, either show up with a scope. I know a lot of people who have scopes, a lot of people who love their scopes. I don't have a scope because I'm a college student and I'm poor. So sometimes that's just a hurdle that you're not going to be able to cross. Or if your issue is light, try and figure out how you can position yourself to where the light source is behind you. Looking into the light is maybe one of the hardest things you can do as a birder, especially if you're tracking something in the sky, you know. You track it all the way up until you're looking right at the sun, and that is excruciatingly blinding. Next thing you know, the bird is gone. So if you have the possibility, usually pretty good idea just to kind of position yourself to where you're not looking directly at the sun. Sometimes it's not a possibility, and sometimes you're going to have backlit birds because of it. And that's why you have these other tips and tricks in order to help you with your IDs. Last potential issue I'm going to hit on is female ducks. I showed you pictures of drakes earlier, the male ducks, because those are the ones that when you think of a duck, that's what you're thinking of. When you think of a mallard, I guarantee you're thinking in your head that nice solid green head that reflects really nicely off, you know, reflects light really, really nicely. Nobody really thinks of hens usually just because a lot of the times, they look the same. I know some of you might not believe it, but these are two different species. You got a mallard on the left and American black duck on the right. And there's a lot of issues that come across mixed flocks where you can't really tell what one female is, what another female is. So that's why we have some of these other tips and tricks just to kind of parse these guys out as well, because I'll be frank, female ducks can make birding mixed duck flocks really, really hard. And almost always you're not going to be looking at a single species across a whole entire flock. So just a couple tips and tricks and ways to mitigate this that I'll discuss a little bit later. So the biggest solution, the overarching theme of what we're going to be looking at here is getting the gestalt of a bird. Now gestalt is what we're thinking of when we think of the general impression of a bird. And this is kind of going to take you one step further than just birding based by color, or color mainly. For example, the way I always usually describe it to people is the way color fits into like the overall impression of a bird is if I were to only be looking at color of a bird, I'd be only looking at this portion of this famous painting right here. Color is one small, minuscule part of the overarching theme of whatever bird you're looking at, and a lot of times it can't give you the whole entire picture. A lot of birds are colored weirdly, colored differently, and sometimes it will screw up your identification. Like, looking at this is one of the most famous pictures of all time. I'm sure everybody, once I show you actually what it is, will be able to identify what this painting is. But just looking at this small little snippet of the picture, no idea what you're looking at. And that's kind of what birding just by color is like. There's sometimes where it works great. If you see just a bunch of male ducks all in a flock, pretty easy to tell what you're differentiating between. Throw in a female, all of a sudden, your window on your whole entire picture narrows down to almost exactly that. Now when we broaden the scope of things and we look at the entire impression of the bird, like I said, the word gestalt, professor taught me that and I've abided by it ever since. When we look at the entire overall impression of the bird, get the gestalt of the bird, we are looking at the Mona Lisa. That's right. That little snapshot right there is right next to her head, right to the left of it, but you wouldn't be able to tell that based on just color alone, based on just that one little speck. So that's why I want to broaden our horizon on how we know birds, how we get to know birds, and different parts and aspects of the bird that can help us identify relatively easily sometimes between different species. Now, the three main things that I'm going to look at today, teach you guys really quickly for how to get that more broad scope view of what a bird is, specifically with water birds. We're going to look at the proportions of birds, the shapes of birds, and with ducks specifically, we're going to look at the speculum. Now, if you'll see right here in this picture, that circled area, that is what we know as the speculum. You'll only find it in ducks, and it's this bright, metallic colored, it's the secondary flight feathers of the wings. So if you look and see the fanned out right by where you would think of the fingers are, those are going to be your primaries, but those feathers that are circled there, hanging off, that are nice and brightly colored, that's called the speculum. And the speculum is a great tool that we have in water bird identification because it differs between different duck species. So a mallard is going to have a different colored speculum than an American black duck, but females also show the colors in the speculum, which is really helpful if you're looking at two hens and you're trying to figure out what species they are. It's the only part of the female, for the most part. Obviously there's exceptions, just like every other rule of thumb, but for the most part, your female ducks are going to show that bright colored speculum, and that's going to be the only colors that they show. And that's going to be a great diagnostic tool that we have in order to help parse out differences between some of them. So to put this in practice, first off, we can look at proportions, get a really nice view of what I'm talking about. Now, on the left, you have a cackling goose, and on the right, you have a Canada goose. One of the diagnostics that people use for identifying Canada geese and cackling geese are that cackling goose have a nice little white necklace right at the base of the neck that borders between kind of the brownish and the blackish. It shows a picture where you couldn't see that because sometimes you're not going to have the ability to see that little necklace. So what to do if you don't have that and you're looking at a flock and you're thinking, well, I might have a cackling goose in there. Easiest thing is just look at the proportions of the head to the rest of the body. If you look at the Canada goose, most of us are acquainted with the Canada goose anyways, so I don't really have to describe it much. But cackling goose almost to me looks like one of those, the end results of a Tom and Jerry, episode or something like that, where Tom's chasing Jerry, all the way to the hole, and he runs smack right into the wall. And when he peels off the wall, he's got this flattened face, and it kind of just slowly stretches out, right? That's kind of what it looks like you're looking at right here with the cackling goose. Looks like a Canada goose ran smack dab, chasing Jerry, ran right into the wall, and he's kind of trying to get that whole facial structure back. For lack of a better term, I almost want to say it looks derpy, because it really does. It doesn't flow, it looks really shortened. The bill is obviously a lot smaller proportion-wise to the rest of the body than a Canada goose. It's rounded out. So, one of those things that we look at are the proportions. The proportion of bill to head is vastly different between the Canada goose and the cackling goose. And I think that's probably what makes it look so dopey, because I'll be honest, I love a cackling goose, but they just look odd, a little stupid sometimes. Going on to ducks, we have on the left a female northern shoveler, and on the right a female mallard. Now, if you were out birding, obviously you can kind of tell just color-wise a big difference with these pictures, but that's a lot different than, being out in the wild trying to get, good pictures, good looks at these birds. Pictures are really usually pretty easy to identify with. So in the wild, this is kind of what we're talking about here. And biggest difference that you can see, the proportion of the bill to the head in a northern shoveler is light years different than proportion of the bill to the head in a female mallard. And that's going to be our main diagnostic that helps us parse out between these two different species. Obviously, these are kind of extremes. I'm just trying to highlight, what we're talking about here. If you see a duck, like the northern shoveler, out on the water, you almost know immediately, and you don't even have to tell colors, because quite frankly, that bill is just massive. It's huge. It almost looks like the duck's going to be weighed down by it. And it's really advantageous for northern shovelers as far as their feeding habits go, but it's also really helpful for us birders when we're trying to figure out what the heck we're looking at. Female mallard, you can obviously see that bill is probably like a head length. It kind of looks like, the picture makes it a little bit hard to tell, but it's kind of what we're looking at. Northern shoveler, you got about a head and a half as far as length alone goes, not to mention just how wide it is, which the picture doesn't really reflect. So that's those are two examples of how we can use proportions in order to help us better identify birds. Moving on to my second small tip for water bird identification is shape, general shape, overall shape of the bird. And the easiest way I figured I could display this is the difference between the canvasback and the redhead duck. Canvasback being the one on the left, redhead being the one on the right. Obviously, first thing that you should notice is that color-wise, decently similar bird. You kind of got the same overall scheme. Obviously, canvasback has got that whiter back, hence the name canvasback, but they both got red heads, and sometimes that can get a little bit confusing when you're looking at birds far away and you can't really tell super well. Easiest thing that I could use to describe it, just the shape of the head. Canvasback, you got that really almost awkward looking sloped head that kind of looks like the bunny hill if you were to put it in like a ski slope terms. Whereas redhead, if you look at it, that's definitely like your black diamond. Like you're going down it quick. That really steep, rounded out forehead. A lot less gradual of a slope from the bill up to the top of the head than we see with the canvasback. And if you look at it, obviously it's really easy to tell when you're looking at really close-up pictures. But if you look at these pictures from far away, you can actually still tell pretty well. You get that really sloped head that kind of peaks right at the top of the head. In the canvasback, you can really easily see that. And then with this group of redheads that you can see here, much more rounded, much more almost spherical of a head kind of shape than you see with the canvasback. And then last, but certainly not least, we have the speculum. Like I was saying earlier, speculum, when you can see it, because not always, depending on the way a duck is perched, you might not be seeing the speculum, but when you can see it, especially with female ducks, these two pictures are great examples of ways to use the speculum to kind of differentiate between your IDs. On the left here, we have a female mallard, and on the right here, we have our female American black duck. And these two duck species, especially if you're looking at like the heads, the females really can be hard to tell in between each other. But you get a good look at these speculums here, and it's pronto, you know what you're looking at. Female mallards in general are always going to have like a bluish, purplish, bordered by white. So the bordered by white is what's really important here, because sometimes it's going to be harder to tell that kind of blue from the purple on American black duck. But the bordered by white, key diagnostic right there. Right away you should know, alright, it's not American black duck. Because with the American black duck, you got your purple bordered by black speculum. When you see that, that should be your key. You know right away what you're looking at. Whereas with the mallard, same thing. You see that white border, you know you're not looking at an American black duck, and vice versa. So that's just an example of how you can really use the speculum to your advantage. It makes duck IDing a lot easier. Like I said before, obviously you're not going to be able to always see the speculum depending on the way a bird is, and that's kind of why we're going to want to have more of a full spectrum picture of it. Not just relying on one thing, because relying on one thing, obviously, stuff happens. So if we add up all those factors, we look at size, shapes, proportions, colors, we add up all these things, and that's how we end up with our Mona Lisa of a bird. Instead of relying on just one trait of a bird, like just relying on, say, a green head with a mallard, which you can also see a green head with a northern shoveler, but when you add in that bill size proportion as well, obviously, green-headed northern shoveler, you're going to be a lot different looking than a green-headed mallard. And so when we add up all those key diagnostics, all those differences, all those, even just the ecology of a bird, what it's doing in the environment, where it's hanging out, all those things combined is how we get our Mona Lisa of the bird. We get our gestalt. We get the general impression. And when we look at that bird, we can tell what it is right away because we know a broad spectrum view of it. And so we're able to use a bunch of different IDing tactics, a bunch of different things to look at. That's how we're going to be able to make our most reliable identifications. Thank you guys for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. Feel free to follow us on Instagram. I just realized that my face cam is going to be blocking out the Instagram, but that's our Instagram handle right there. Subscribe for more bird-related videos. Like I said at the start, share this with anybody who you think would like to watch this, and feel free to reach out to me and let me know what other kind of groups you might want to watch a video on. I know I've had a lot of people request warblers, warbler migration is coming up, and sparrows as well. So if you have any taxonomic groups that you would be interested in seeing another identification, tips and tricks video on, please feel free to either leave a comment, you can send me an email, I'll leave my email in the description as well. Other than that, thank you guys for hanging out while we're all on Coronication. Stay happy, stay healthy, and happy birding.